Welcome to the film analysis, today with Sound of Freedom by Alejandro Monteverde. We are getting back into the culture war as this is an extremely successful film. In the USA, it is the most successful film in this year, and if you haven't heard of this film yet, don't worry, because it sucks. We don't even have to refer to the ideological aspects to begin with. The film fails aesthetically. But nevertheless, this film has been immensely successful, and partly due to the fact that it is related to the culture war and partly because the executive producer is Mel Gibson. Angel Studios, which is known for Christian cinema, brought this film to the market. And the main actor is James Caviezel, who is close to the QAnon movement. And at the end of the film, James Caviezel speaks to the audience again and explains at length how difficult it was to get this film into cinemas in the first place, and then there's a lot of talk about those who try to prevent this film from being released. Well, a buyout by Disney has led to this film being cancelled. Disney had no interest in it. The film was already shot in 2019. Sound of Freedom was not released in cinemas mainly because of economic considerations, and if you consider the quality of this film, you don't know why it's supposed to be in the cinema. But the creators are charging it with cultural warfare, fantasizing that liberal elites have banned this film. This also corresponds to the reception among right-wingers. Steve Bannon suggests the film to be great, as does Donald Trump. First, we must approach this film aesthetically and ask ourselves the question, does the new American right in protecting this film in this way have any aesthetic of its own? The question is easy to answer. No, they are just working with existing stereotypes, narratives and visual languages that we have all seen thousands of times. There is nothing at all original in this film. Some of the work is passable. It's by no means a disaster, but it's not a film that would be talked about in any way if it weren't for all this controversy. Let's approach the plot first. It all begins in Honduras. A father with no money is very desperate. A woman appears who used to be a beauty queen and offers to sign a modeling contract with his children. There is a little boy, Miguel, and the daughter Rocio, and they could be turned into child models. The father agrees, and it happens as it must. The children are kidnapped, so it's about child trafficking and child prostitution, child abuse and child pornography. And now real-life right-wing hero Tim Ballard appears, played by James Caviezel. He is an agent with the Homeland Security investigation. He must go deep into the Amazon region. There, sinister henchmen hide Rocio and abuse her, but Tim Ballard will free her, and that's where the film ends. It takes almost 130 minutes to tell the simple story, since the film is constantly trying to create atmosphere. There is whispering and murmuring throughout the film. We are dealing with dark machinations. There is talk of the biggest criminal network that has ever existed. There are more victims of enslavement today than under historical slavery. We must, they say, stop the network, otherwise it will continue to expand. Some figures are being bandied about, and it is, of course, difficult to check which of these figures are fact-based or not. The fact is, however, that child trafficking and child abuse represents a huge issue worldwide. Organizations such as UNICEF repeatedly report on the issue in studies. So the film doesn't deal with a secret at all. At times, the film exaggerates some things due to sensationalism. But in general, we are dealing with an incredibly sad, very far-reaching phenomenon throughout the world. It must be addressed. But the film pretends all the time that it is revealing a secret. Yet a single Google search provides many figures and testimonials. So if you are interested, you can understand everything that is said here in a much more objective manner. Now we know stories like this, where someone goes off to save someone else. For example, we have Rambo Last Blood. However, this film reflects more on the failed fighters of imperialism. But Sound of Freedom is about banal heroism. The film is intended to create a monument to Tim Ballard as the brave hero, having saved so many children, even if certain doubts can be raised about the figure he represents. But let's leave that aside because it's not relevant when evaluating this film. More importantly, it is a film in which an agent leaves the state framework to seek out the perpetrators in a campaign of vengeance. An entrepreneurial approach: you first raise money for this hotel and then create this trap that child traffickers fall into, almost like a disruption strategy. But the economic aspect is left out. The film shows subjects who realize their sick fantasies and have the money to do so. But this particularly heinous form of child exploitation also has an economic framework. How can such businesses flourish in the first place? What economic hardship drives children and families into this misery? Although it is shown at the beginning that the father in Honduras is destitute, the film is not about exploitation or inequality. It's more about using these rich child abusers to open an associative space about the liberal elites who also seem perverted in some way. Well, there are indeed child molesters among the liberal elites too. But this has nothing to do with any political attitude. Unfortunately, they exist everywhere. However, the film naturally tries to externalize the problem, also leading to contextless heroism. Tim Ballard is the heroic one who goes forward to save the children. But it's not even discussed in detail. What problems do we have with the exploitation of children? How can these conditions be combated? Instead, the film focuses on one person. The same principle tabloid journalism applies when it highlights a perpetrator, a savior, a rescued person, just like in Sound of Freedom. Because the second half of the film is all about Tim Ballard having to save Rokyo whatever happens. The film has a strong Christian component, especially because the film is about a fight against evil. You know, you can establish a religion without God, but you can't found a religion without the devil. Evil is needed to create a community, and this community is to be created through the evil that is shown to us here. So we are supposed to gather behind the film, behind Tim Ballard, and see ourselves as a community against the child abusers. And the individual will always continue to be the heroic fighter. But we will never abstract from this individual, never look at the whole picture. We have arrived here at a similar phenomenon to The Equalizer, where it's also always one individual fighting evil. But the evil will, of course, come back repeatedly if you don't change the framework as such. In all of this, the child serves as a projection surface for one's own purity. We should see that the right-wingers here are as innocent as children. And yet we have no problem whatsoever with children starving to death or being deported worldwide because of our imperial way of life. The child to be saved, Rokyo, is the only thing that counts and therefore acts as an ideology carrier. Instead of talking about structures, the focus remains on a single child through this crude emotional steering. Although we are given the statistics on human trafficking in the film, there is no fight against the structure. Instead, we are supposed to warm our hearts just for an individual fate. We know this from the tabloids. Whenever there are touching rescue operations involving children trapped in mines and rescuers freeing them, there are headlines like, "The world holds its breath." Well, of course, this reporting and the readers who greedily take it in are not concerned with the fate of the children, but allow themselves to be moved by these stories, by the love of humanity they harbor. The film works with this. The film doesn't lead us to think in any way, it doesn't irritate us, but works with such a silly, clear, black and white scheme that you understand everything from beginning to end, and this film doesn't trigger anything else in you. But are we dealing with a right-wing film here? Angel Studios produces particularly Christian conservative films, and this evangelical film market is growing globally. Religion is increasingly returning to people's consciousness. Hence why audiences are craving edification films or deterrent films like this one, which once again expose the negative and show how good you are. But we certainly must note here that we are dealing with a fictionalization, a true story, even if there are justified doubts about some of Ballard's stories. But he wants to create a cinematic monument to himself here. And this is also intricately linked to an understanding of the community when it is emphasized once again at the end that there were thousands of angel investors who made this film possible against all odds. It is supposedly impossible to talk about this topic in the mainstream media. Complete nonsense, as such topics come up repeatedly, and there are many documentaries on the subject, and Hollywood hasn't ignored this topic either. For example, there is Marco Kreuzpeintner's film Trade, Welcome to America, incidentally produced by Roland Emmerich. But let's get back to the question, is Sound of Freedom a right-wing film? To answer the question, let's ignore the makers of the film. What is the message of this film? Child abuse and human trafficking are bad? Is there anyone who doubts that? No. Is that a left-wing or right-wing position? No. The question is, what can you do about it apart from hoping for a hero? Waiting for a hero or messiah is de facto useless for most people, and it is a sign of right-wing ideology. The children will not be saved, only little Rocchio and a few others. Are we dealing with a right-wing film because it addresses something otherwise not addressed? Do liberal media ignore such topics? That's not true per se. But you must admit that the left liberal media sometimes look the other way when they need to be traveling in irritating circles for certain investigations. It was striking how long this Jeffrey Epstein system worked and how little the liberal press reported on this case afterwards. It was also surprising how investigative the conservative press was. But in principle, neither the mainstream nor the left-wing press denies that child abuse and human trafficking are a huge problem. But now we come to the problem of the right. Amazingly, when right-wingers talk about child abuse, they tend to externalize, suggest it to be either geographically far away, like in the Amazon, or far away ideologically, that is in liberal elite circles. However, most abuse takes place within families, right-wingers would have to correct their image of the family and their relationship with the state. Repeatedly, conservative and right-wing parties prevent children from being given their own protection outside the family, so that, for example, agencies are created to help children if they are in danger at home. Right-wing parties torpedo help centers and policies for children at risk. What's more, the economy matters. What an unequal society it must be, where parents even cooperate with child traffickers because they can no longer afford to live any other way. In addition, the right has few problems when children are enslaved in another manner, namely through child labor. We have even seen in recent months how Republicans in the US have continued to weaken the laws rendering child labor possible again. 160 million children work worldwide, and Trump famously separated children from their parents who wanted to flee to the USA. What does the film tell us? The primitive narrative goes on and on, but carries no meaning, lacking multiple perspectives. Instead, the film drones on with sinister chorals. The hackneyed aesthetic appears on the screen every other frame, and we see quite some bad acting. In all of this, the hero is more important than the children. To be fair, though this is true of many films, the rescuer is usually more interesting than the rescued. A girl must be rescued here and nothing else matters. This narrative that a single person must be saved can also be extended to the fact that in Meg we see how Jason Statham only has to save a lapdog, and then all is right with the world again. It is the same narrative. We have arrived here in a typical Hollywood film that doesn't want to take the big picture, but simply wants to emotionalize and warm our hearts so that we don't think any further. It would be more important to realize how popular films constantly reduce complexity, whether this fuels right-wing propaganda, which is what evangelical filmmakers are aiming for. And we have a problem that has received little attention. And that puts us close to the tabloid reporting that characterizes this film. The camera wallows in horror, tasteless, indecently. It looks voyeuristically at these cases. At the beginning, for example, the camera imitates the child pornographic look when the children are there for a photo shoot and are supposed to pose in front of the camera and behave provocatively. The children are on display here. The film should be taking a different, opposing view. And we even see the photos in the hands of the child molesters. But then the camera itself switches to looking down on the little children from above the whole time. That's the distasteful thing about this film. The cruelties are depicted lustfully, just as we see in many tabloid reports. It is gimmickry. Interestingly, another film is in the theaters as of now, Killers of the Flower Moon by Martin Scorsese. In his cameo appearance, Scorsese himself denounces the fact that not everything should be exploited for effect. Sound of Freedom does just that. It exploits the exploitation of children for commercial purposes and for dishonest political reasons. It does not attempt to convey a different aesthetic, distinct perspective. The children are victimized a second time so that we watch but don't see. It would be nice if you would like to support the film analysis financially. You can do so via my bank account or PayPal. Also, you can find me on Patreon. Thank you very much.